in early 67, two things happened. One, they convinced Lester to come to work at I.C. Thompson, so they stole their client. But B, Dad and Andy decided if we're ever going to own anything, we're going to have to go start it ourselves. So they said, we're leaving. Bobby and Lester said, hey, we'll go with you. And so 1968, poof, there's SSR.
Welcome to SSR On Air. I'm Mike Rogers, your host for this monthly podcast brought to you by Seckman Reed. Tune in as I interview leaders, colleagues, and clients about what is going on internally at SSR and in the larger engineering community. So in February, we celebrate SSR's anniversary, 54 years. We're founded in 1968. Join us for a two-part podcast where first I sit down with Clay Seckman, son of Tom Seckman, one of the original four founders, and then we visit with Jon Ross, 40-plus year veteran and leader at SSR. Clay and I talk about SSR's evolution from an MEP healthcare firm into a full-service healthcare consultant. Jon walks us through the growth into different markets and geographies and where we are today.
So where do we start?
Well, Clay, I start by welcoming you. Welcome to the podcast, SSR On Air. Glad to have you here. Good. So today we're visiting with Clay Seckman of Smith Seckman Reed, second generation. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to hit you with a few easy questions first and let you do what you do. So we'll start off with probably an easy one is how did you end up at SSR?
Well, as they say, it's a long story. I guess my dad's dad was an engineer. My dad was obviously an engineer, and I just knew I'd be an engineer for whatever reason. And whether that's a curse or a blessing, I guess it's yet to be determined. But, went to engineering school at Vanderbilt and I think I interviewed one other place in a sales job or something and realized that's not me. So it was probably... I won't say it was a no-brainer, but it was a conscious no-brainer. I just knew that this is what I wanted to do.
Fixed on it from the start.
Yeah. And I remember when Dad used to bring home, when he was in the early days, he'd bring home a set of drawings and we'd help color them up based on the zoning of an HVAC system so that he could go explain it to the guy at HCA who didn't really understand engineering, but he understood colored drawings. And so I always thought it was cool. I thought that looking at the drawings and understanding a little bit of what was on there was just fun, and it appealed to my technical nature, I guess. My dad he grew up in West Virginia, graduated from University of West Virginia when he was 19 years old, and went to the Air Force, and they sent him to the wind tunnel down at AEDC as an engineer. Mom grew up which is near Tullahoma, and Mom grew up in Tullahoma, boy meets girl, next thing you know, they're married. They moved to Atlanta. Dad leaves the Air Force and he goes to work for Carrier, back when Carrier was a design, build, manufacture, install, everything. And there was a guy there that had been there a couple of years ahead of him named Andy Reed. Andy grew up in South Georgia and went to Georgia Tech. So they started working together. That would have been 1953. And my older brother was born there. They sent Dad to Charlotte in 56 to Air Conditioned Memorial Hospital, which was one of their first big healthcare projects to do. And so my dad got involved in healthcare starting in 1956. And so I was born there. Then Andy came to Nashville to go to work for a little firm called I.C. Thompson and Associates and sent a telex to my dad, which he still had till he died, that said, you need to come interview. So next thing you know, 1958, Dad comes to I.C. Thompson. Bobby Smith's already there as plumbing drafter. And Lester Smith was a client. He was the head electrical engineer over at Vanderbilt. And so they started working for Mr. Thompson in 58, and he owned the whole thing. And for the next 10 years, he's talking about ownership transition. Owners gonna, and never did a thing. And finally, in early 67, two things happened. One, they convinced Lester to come to work at I.C. Thompson, so they stole their client. But B, Dad and Andy decided if we're ever going to own anything, we're going to have to go start it ourselves. So they said, we're leaving. Bobby and Lester said, hey, we'll go with you. And so 1968, poof, there's SSR. Without a job in hand, they mortgaged their houses. It was a big risk in 1968. Yeah. And I remember Dad sitting down, my three brothers and I sit us down in the fall of 67. So this would have been, I was 10 years old. He said, well, your dad, me and Mr. Reed and a couple were going to leave Mr. Thompson to go start our own company. I remember sitting there thinking, I'm 10. So he said, it's going to be a lot of hard work starting this company and all this, and it probably means we're not going to be taking any vacations to Florida for a few years. I remember looking at my older brother and going, hold the phone. What? You know? But they did. They worked their tails off for the first 10 years. But one of the reasons that they were already doing healthcare. They were working at Vanderbilt, doing all the work at Vanderbilt, even going back to the 60s. St. Thomas, one of the replacement hospital, the then replacement hospital that's out in West End, was one of their first big healthcare projects. But when they started in '68 was the same year that HCA started. And Bobby Smith just happened to be ping pong partners with a guy named Tommy Frist, whose dad just happened to be the Frist of HCA. So next thing you know, Gresham and Smith has started, Joe M. Rogers has started that same year, us and H. So the four firms, one of them outgrew the other three, obviously, but so we started doing HCA work in the late '60s. I got out of school 10 years later, and at that point, HCA was 80% of our work, and we were doing it all over the country, wherever they could find dirt. This was when in the heyday of the Hill-Burton Act, they were building hospitals left and right. So those are our healthcare roots. Really started way back when, back in the '50s. But we started asking some questions in the mid '90s about. Well, actually, we started being asked by some of our clients to help them with what was then some of the original infancy, I would say, technology systems. And it was nurse call, it was security systems, it was very simple voice data kind of systems. Yeah. And in the mid-'90s, we said, there's something to this. And so we formed a team that said this is going to be a technology team. And back then, it was literally just 3 or 4 different systems. But as technology began to take over more and more in the delivery of care, and certainly now you look at it with the electronic health records and everything else, it's a huge piece of a project. That team has grown from whatever they were, 3 or 4 people. I think we have 35 people on that team now. And it's been a really good business for us to be in. I think that's one of the areas that's going to continue to grow dramatically is the spend. Go back 10, 15 years ago, and on any typical capital project, the spend on the technology systems was 1, 2, maybe 3% of the construction cost. That number is now 12%, 15%, and probably not going anywhere but north from there. So that's been a good place for us to be. About the same time, we got asked, and I remember which project it was. It was a big lab project down at UAB in Birmingham. They could not get the systems working right. We were down there working on another project, the North Pavilion, and they asked us to help. Can you help us come fix this thing? The next thing you know, we're doing commissioning work. And Rusty Ross got down there and said, hey, there's something to this. And so we started a commissioning team in 99, maybe 2000, something like that. Right. Yeah. And that group is 50 people now. I mean, it is a significant part of SSR, but it was responding to a need, and both of those responding to a need in the industry that you sort of, by having those relationships and listening to people talk on the owner side, listening to them talk about their frustrations and the challenges they have, and then trying to connect the dots to say, well, what could we do to change that, is where those two came from. So they've been huge for us. As the technology grew and became more, we started looking at the integration, or the degree to which technology and equipment planning, medical equipment planning, were converging to where you're planning a nursing suite or an OR theater or whatever it is, and you start looking at all the components that are in those spaces. Are they equipment piece? Are they medical equipment, or are they IT equipment? And they're really both. The way we're streaming data out a lot. So we started looking. Long story made short, we started looking for some firms to partner with to say, how can we combine our services? A group in Atlanta that we'd been working with for 15 years or so finally said, why don't you guys just buy us? Because they were 10 people at the time, and so they became part of SSR 3 years ago, and they're now 25 people, I guess, and that has been a wonderful evolution. So again, it was responding to a need in the market that our clients were saying, hey, we need a different solution.
So I wanted to say thanks for coming in and talking today.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you joining us.
Next time we do it, we can start telling SSR stories.
Yes, there's plenty.
There are plenty.
There's plenty. So we start off by saying welcome to SSR On Air. Today we're talking with Jon Ross. And John, what is your official title here now? What is your official role?
Well, I am one of the 2 program directors, and I am the director of the vertical program that includes our MEP technology, medical equipment design, our building envelope design and commissioning, our new building commissioning, and our building optimization and sustainability practice.
All right.
So it's quite a mouthful.
A lot of good stuff. So before we get into that and how we got there, we'll back up a little bit and ask a few personal questions about how you ended up here at SSR and maybe your history, education, your path here, and maybe the early days?
Well, that's a pretty short story. I came to Nashville to go to Vanderbilt University, and my senior year, my housing was across the street from the corporate headquarters of SSR.
No.
So I put a coat and a tie on, I walked across the street, and I got a job in 1981, and I've been here ever since. So I was an electrical engineer, and so I started there, in our only office at the time in Nashville, and just became, started leading design, and had the opportunity to even go overseas a bit, over to Saudi Arabia to do some work, which was kind of fun in my first couple of years. And then about 2.5 years in, Rob Barrick asked me to join him and Clay Seckman and a couple others to go to Houston to open our first branch office. And I said yes, and that was quite an experience. I was down there for 6 years, came back in 1990, and stepped into managing a team that was focused on the East Coast. So it was, and things have just kind of grown from there. In the mid to late 90s, more and more technology, in particular in the healthcare market, was becoming a much bigger thing. And so where electrical used to show nurse call and, some data outlets, that was becoming a much bigger component and actually more of a niche of expertise. And so we had hired a fellow named Scott Johnson, who was savvy in that area, and we decided to get into the technology design business. And in fact, he was involved in the big Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, and we had hired a company to help us do that, and then we kind of launched off of that into telecom design in the late 90s. And that has been a great move for us. We have quite a group there now that does that work. At the same time, of course, Mike, you came along and
around 2000.
Yeah, and so while we had an MEP group in that division, the Southeast Division, I think you actually had a big part in taking us into a different market, that sports market, and in fact, I guess it kind of fell behind when we actually did the Bridgestone Arena.
It did, right? I came in right behind that tail end of opening that facility. Yeah.
So in terms of growth of markets, obviously I don't, you could probably do the talking now because that was your baby, and you kind of have grown that over the years. But the other thing that was really made a huge impact, I think, for us was that we moved into commissioning, and the team leader, actually of the team you joined, he stepped over to lead that group, and most of our owners didn't understand what commissioning was at the time, so we had to do a lot of educating of our clients. But it has become, and of course now is actually required by some of the lead accreditations and things like that. So it is a thriving business that we have, and has evolved into other aspects of commissioning as well. So that happened right around that 2000, 2002 timeframe.
Yeah, it was 2002, I think, is where we kicked off commissioning, and it really was driven a lot by the whole move towards lead in a way, because we saw that it was going to be a requirement, and we were early adopters for sure into that market.
Yeah.
And John Gromos, Mike Coyne, Rusty all kind of instigated that, and it was 2002. That's when I officially took on the sports and commercial. I used to call it everything but healthcare group, because that's kind of what we did. We did anything but healthcare, but we did focus certainly on the sports work. But yeah. So at that point, a lot of things changed at that point too, and we started opening a few other locations. Soon after that,
we had in the 90s. Of course, I guess the other big thing that happened was that we had gotten to know the firm EOCR, Ehlers Oakley, Chester Wright, down in Memphis, and they were facing, what many firms face, the transition of ownership and things like that, and felt like culture was similar enough, and that it brought a different offering. And so we actually, in counseling or coaching them, some of our leadership, Tom Seckman and Rob Barrick, turned into a discussion of actually acquiring the firm. which we did, and so we had them in the mid '90s. We acquired them, and that is now our, that brought us the transportation, the civil and structural, site civil and then structural design, and I believe the majority of our transportation, still kind of comes out of there. And they had MEP as well. So we acquired a few other services and kind of a better reach into the Memphis market in that region at that time. And out of that has come, and they kind of had it going on then too, but they served pretty much all the markets there, one of which was industrial, which has now become really kind of a thriving market for us as well. So
I'm trying to think, when is it that we acquired the firm in Denver?
Gordon Gummison.
Gordon Gummison.
That was around 09, I think.
9 or 10 is what I was thinking.
9 or 10, and I remember that they had just recently joined us, and we'd gotten that big SAMC project, and so they quickly became part of that entire team, that we had. And at the time, we actually had already opened up a Phoenix office, and so we were using people from all three offices. So that office was the Denver office was the former Gordon Gummison group. Over the last 3 years, we have started talking about a regional business plan and a regional business model, and where in the past, for healthcare in particular, as an example, we were kind of a national firm, and we felt we could, and I think could, go almost anywhere and be considered for a project and have a good shot at winning it. And what we were beginning to find is that competition had also, learned to do healthcare design and be experts, and that our clients really wanted local representation. Yeah. And so we took advantage of someone we had hired in Cleveland, and so we have a small office up there with a couple of engineers that were, using that as an outpost to get work in that region. We made kind of another play and moved somebody into Charlotte when there was there's a lot of awesome work over there, and just strengthened our position to be over there. I guess another service line, again, just under the theme of growth, as we're talking about how we have looked for opportunities to grow. In the design side, Clay Seckman had come across and made friends with Debbie Heitzman, who had her own medical equipment planning group, and brought that to us. Kind of back to the leadership to say, hey, I think this would be an opportunity for us, because this industry is a little bit, the players out there just aren't providing the best service. And lo and behold, we ended up buying what was SHR, Debbie's firm, and we just had to replace the middle initial. It's SSR now. But they started with a group of about 10 people in Atlanta. And so we all of a sudden had an Atlanta office. So we took advantage of that and put a mechanical engineer down there to start pursuing all the design services we could. And so our medical equipment group, we bought, this is 22, 21, that would be 18, I think. It's December of 18 we bought them. And they've grown from the 10 people, they're over 20 people now. And we have people in Houston, Atlanta. We have a pretty good sized group in Houston. We've got at the moment one person in the DFW area, one in Louisiana, one in Philadelphia, and we had one here in Nashville. So we've got them scattered around a bit, but they're all working really well together as a team, and it's been fun to see them grow. So we're continuing to push for growth. And we have initiatives. Like I said, we have an office in Atlanta and Charlotte. We have we're focused on kind of that urban southeast region to capture work down there. Probably the biggest opportunities we have right now are in Texas, and certainly some of our biggest focus is in Texas, the Texas Triangle, which is another region that is growing substantially. You'll probably have a podcast on that.
I'm sure we will.
But as we have done that, and as we're acquiring people, it's interesting as we can acquire people. and they can be allowed to work remote totally or some of the time, we're finding that we can get more people that otherwise, if they had to come to the Dallas office and they lived in Fort Worth, they weren't interested. They didn't want that drive. But now that we're able to have them work at home and come in once, maybe twice a week, that has helped us. So now we have several people in Fort Worth, and this year we have officially opened our Fort Worth office.
Right.
So that gives us an address that we believe will give us access to more clients in Fort Worth that are more parochial potentially.
Yeah.
In addition, we have opened up an Austin office, so that puts us in all 3 points of the triangle in Texas.
Yeah.
It worked for Southwest Airlines. That's how they started, on the back of a napkin. Drew the triangle and said,
right.
"Hey, let's do something here."
Yeah.
I figure if it worked for them, it'll work for us.
Yeah.
So,
well, thanks, John. That was a great discussion. I appreciate the insight into the history.
Going down memory lane like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always fun.
Taking a stroll.
Yeah.
So.
Telling us a little bit about where we are, maybe where we're going to. That's good stuff. Thanks for joining us for this episode of SSR On Air. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. You can also connect with us on social media. Links to everything can be found in the show's notes. Take care, everyone. See you next time.